I was doing well, trying to keep my life on track. I wasn't selling drugs or anything like that. Please, don't give me 13 years. This is convicted drug lord Jose Jimenez, who police say worked with a Mexican cartel to traffic up to 100 kilos of heroin into Columbus monthly. The investigation seized 25 kilos of heroin, worth $24 million. Jimenez pleaded guilty to 2 counts of trafficking and 1 count of engaging in corrupt activity. Today, he faces sentencing at the Franklin County Courthouse. Far from his days as a ringleader, Jimenez shuffles into the courtroom in khaki prison scrubs. Despite this, he shoots a cold stare at the narcotics investigators. Assistant Prosecutor Dan Stanley emphasizes Jimenez's high-ranking position and the cartel's fearsome power.
This is the ringleader of an organization that is so fear-inspiring that the people who come here from Mexico refuse to testify against it because they know as soon as they are born, their family will be murdered in Mexico.
Noting the difficulties in obtaining convictions against its members, Jimenez stands bolt upright, glaring into the distance. A protected female witness testifies about her role in storing and moving heroin for Jimenez. He remains stoic, occasionally blinking. Addressing the court through an interpreter, he offers a curt apology in Spanish. Judge Kimberly Koft dismisses his regret and highlights his statutory requirements for conviction. Showing no reaction, Jimenez is sentenced to 21 years in prison and ordered to be deported upon release. Jimenez's total lack of emotion is unnerving, and Dexter Lee Williams shows similar catatonic coldness. The 53-year-old kingpin is about to be sentenced at Houston County Superior Court for violating the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. His conviction stems from leading a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking operation between Mexico and Atlanta. Police seized 39 kilos of cocaine worth $3.5 million when they arrested him. Williams talked and laughed to himself in the back of the police car following his arrest.
Son of a bitch, they caught me that fast. Should have never walked into that fucking house.
Judge Bo Adams has strong words for Williams, stating he is being sentenced not for personal addiction, but for profiting from others' suffering. Williams remains unmoved, while his defense attorney, Wanda Jackson, grows agitated.
You're holding what I said.
I'm talking to Mr. Williams. I've heard everything.
Right, but you're holding, no, what other accusations? He didn't testify, so you're holding what I said.
I've heard everybody.
Adams cuts her off, asserting Williams' guilt, and sentences him to 40 years without parole. Even the prospect of life in prison doesn't stir a reaction from Williams. For Williams, the allure of power and money led him to trafficking. However, not all dealers live lavishly, as seen in the case of Wallace Bigger. Police say Bigger moved a significant pipeline of prescription drugs through Antrim County, Michigan, over several years. Despite earning over $220,000, he lived in squalor in a camper van on his daughter's driveway. Throughout his trial, the 71-year-old protested his innocence and berated his legal counsel.
The judge is biased, and I said from the start, Andrew County would not to be a fair trial.
He was eventually convicted of conducting a criminal enterprise under Michigan's racketeering laws. Today, Bigger is appearing before Judge Philip Rogers for sentencing. The judge doesn't hold back as he lays out the elderly drug lord's trashy living conditions and manipulative nature. Despite his protestations of innocence and claims of a biased trial,
I'm sentencing you to 180 to 360 months on charge number 1. On charge 2, the controlled substance delivery charge, 23 to 240 months. Charges 3 and 4, 23 to 240 months. On the maintaining a drug house, 16 to 24 months. And on conducting the criminal enterprise, that's 50 to 240 months.
Bigger is sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in total, likely ensuring he will never see the light of day again. While most drug lords are convicted for possessing illegal substances with the intent to distribute, rarely are they held accountable for the effects their drugs have on vulnerable customers. However, in the case of Aaron Andrade, the 25-year-old drug dealer is in court today for sentencing after admitting his part in the overdose death of 29-year-old Kristen Coutu. Coutu had left a drug treatment facility just 2 days before her death. She arranged to buy drugs from Andrade, but unknown to her, the heroin he gave her was laced with a fatal dose of fentanyl. This landmark case saw Andrade plead no contest to second-degree murder in relation to Coutu's death.
First time a drug dealer has been convicted of murder of someone who overdosed, a landmark case with many implications for how the state will prosecute dealers.
In a plea agreement that dismissed 2 further drug charges. At sentencing, Judge Kristen Rogers hears from the prosecution on the nature of the evidence against Andrade. Kristen Coutu's mother gives an emotional impact statement, recalling the horror of being told her daughter had overdosed.
Some police officers standing there. All I could say repeatedly was, "Please don't tell me my daughter is dead. Please don't tell me my daughter is dead."
Andrade, taking full responsibility for his actions, expresses remorse and a clear understanding of the grief he caused. Despite his genuine remorse, Judge Rogers hands him a 40-year sentence with 20 to serve. While true remorse like Andrade's is unusual, some defendants, like Charles Crossy, remain cold and unapologetic. Crossy is in Claremont County Court for sentencing on drug trafficking and corruption charges. Found guilty on 12 counts, Crossy was caught with $5,000 worth of heroin and cocaine intended for the streets of New Richmond. He has a long criminal history and set up his dealing empire just 4 months after being released from a previous prison stint. Assistant Prosecutor Darren Miller highlights the damage Crossy's activities caused to the community.
Enough, but laced with fentanyl, it becomes a game of Russian roulette. And individuals like Charles Crossy provide the weapon, they provide the bullet, and they spin the chamber, pointing at the addict's head, and all the addict has to do is pull the trigger. That's who Charles Crossy is.
Police Chief Rand Harvey tells the court how Crossy forced addicts to sell drugs for him, revealing the extent of his manipulative and violent tactics. Despite the damning evidence, Crossy remains indifferent as Judge Herman sentences him to 20 years and 9 months in prison. Some kingpins, like Crossy, prefer working alone, but others, like Rashad and Marquez Johnson, make it a family business. The Jacksonville siblings are appearing before Duval County Judge R. Anthony Salem for sentencing after being convicted of drug trafficking and possession charges. Members of the Johnson family plead for leniency, highlighting the men's roles as fathers.
After things I could have been different as a parent, I know my sons could have had a better outcome in life.
And he's a family man?
He is.
And do you feel he's a good father?
He's a great father.
The brothers also address the judge, denying involvement in gang activity and asking for leniency. Prosecutors argue that the Johnson brothers continued their criminal activities despite previous convictions. The judge ultimately sentences them to 30 years each in state prison, a decision that stuns the courtroom. While the Johnson brothers' sentences may seem heavy, they pale in comparison to the punishment faced by Robert Lloyd Schellenberg. Caught trafficking 222 kilos of methamphetamine in China, Schellenberg was initially sentenced to 15 years in prison. After appealing and being granted a retrial, he was sentenced to death, a move suspected to be a diplomatic message to Canadian authorities. Felix Doran, a Frenchman, faced a similar fate in Indonesia. Convicted of trafficking 3 kilos of various drugs, Doran was initially sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to 19 years in prison after an appeal. Harsh sentences for drug-related offenses are more common in Asian countries, but there have been exceptions in the Western world. In 1996, Jeff Mazansky was caught trying to sell 3 kg of marijuana to a dealer connected to Mexican drug cartels. Under Missouri's law for persistent drug offenders, Mazansky was sentenced to life without parole. After more than 20 years in prison, Mazansky's case gained attention, and his sentence was eventually commuted by Governor Jay Nixon. In a remarkable moment, Mazansky walked free after spending over 2 decades behind bars, highlighting the changing attitudes toward drug-related offenses in the U.S. That is all about today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it with your friends. And if you are new to the channel, please subscribe to it. Thank you, and see you in the next video.